Hi, boys and girls. Mrs. Tento again. This is part 2 of The Wonderful Machine, which is chapter 13 from Little House in the Big Wood. No, it's chapter 12 from the chapter book Little House in the Big Woods. And you kindergarten boys and girls do a wonderful job listening to all of this wonderful story. It'll be done in one more chapter, but I'm going to just read this little bit of the 12th chapter. Pa and Uncle Henry sat on top of the wheat stack. Um, on top of the wheat stack were pitching bundles down onto a board. A man stood at the board and cut the bands on the bundles and crowded the bundles one at a time into a hole at the end of the separator. The hole looked like the separator's mouth, and it had long iron teeth. The teeth were chewing and chewing. They chewed the bundles, and the separator swallowed them. Straw blew out of the separator's other end, and wheat poured out of its side. Two men were working fast, trampling the straw and building it into a stack. One man was working fast, sacking the pouring grain. The grains of wheat poured out of the separator into a half-bushel measure, and as fast as the measure filled, the man slipped an empty one into its place and emptied the full one into a sack. He had just time to empty it and slip it back up under the spout before the other measure ran over. All the men were working as fast as they possibly could, but the machine kept right up with them. Laura and Mary were so excited they could hardly breathe. They held hands tightly and stared. The horses walked around and around. The man who was driving them cracked the whip and shouted, "Get up there, John! No use trying to shirk." Crack went the whip. "Careful there, Billy. Easy, boy. You can't go but so fast nohow." The separator swallowed the bundles. The golden straw blew out in a golden cloud. The wheat streamed golden brown out of the spout while the men hurried. Pa and Uncle Henry pitched bundles down as fast as they could, and chaff and dust blew everywhere over everything. Laura and Mary watched as long as they could. They ran Then they ran back to the house to help Ma get dinner for all the men. A big kettle of cabbage and meat was boiling on the stove. A big pan of beans and a Johnny cake were baking in the oven. Laura and Mary set the table for the threshers. They put on salt rising bread and butter, bowls of stewed pumpkin, pumpkin pies and dried berry pies, and cookies and cheese and honey and pitchers of milk. Then Ma put on the boiled potatoes and cabbage and meat, the baked beans, the hot Johnny cake, and the baked Hubbard squash. And she poured the tea. Laura always wondered why bread made of cornmeal was called Johnny cake. It wasn't cake. Ma didn't know unless the northern soldiers called it Johnny cake because the people in the South, where they fought, ate so much of it, they called the southern soldiers Johnny Rebs. Maybe they called the southern bread cake just for fun. Ma had heard some say it should be called journey cake. She didn't know it wouldn't be very good bread to take on a journey. At noon, the threshers came into the table, loaded with food, but there was none too much. Sorry about that. A light went off. By the middle of the afternoon, the machines. Wait a minute. But there was none too much, for threshers work hard and get very hungry. By the middle of the afternoon, the machines had finished all the threshing, and the men who owned them drove them away into the big woods, taking with them the sacks of wheat that were their pay. They were going to the next place where neighbors had stacked their wheat and had wanted the machine to thresh it. Pa was very tired that night, but he was happy. He said to Ma, "It would have taken Henry and Peterson and Pa and me a couple of weeks apiece to thresh as much grain as with flails as that machine threshed today. We wouldn't have got as much wheat either, and it wouldn't have been as clean. That machine's a great invention," he said. Other folks can stick to old-fashioned ways if they want to, but I'm all for progress. It's a great age we're living in. As long as I can raise wheat, I'm going to have a machine come and thresh it. if there's one anywhere in the neighborhood. He was too tired that night to talk to Laura, but Laura was proud of him. It was Pa who had got the other men to stack their wheat together and send for the threshing machine, and it was a wonderful machine. Everybody was glad it had come. And that is the end of the story of the wonderful machine, which is kind of the start of a new age in America when all kinds of new inventions came about and made life a lot easier on the farms and for people. And soon would come planes, trains, and then planes and light bulbs and all kinds of helpful things that people didn't have for thousands of years. It's just been in the last 200 years that a lot of the machinery has come into place, boys and girls. And that's why I think Laura devoted some time to talking about the machine, because they had not had any in the late, up into even the late 1800s, very few machines. And when the cars came into being, my grandfather, the first time he saw one as a little boy, called it an automobubble. He didn't know what else it was called. It was the automobubble, not the automobile, the automobubble. And we heard that story. But when I think of it, my own grandparents were born in the last decade of the 1800s, which would be the 1890s, and they went from when there were no cars to trains. And, well, I guess there have been trains already, but trains, automobiles, airplanes, and then rockets and man on the moon. They lived through a wonderful century of inventions and conveniences, and they sure let us know how much better and easier it was to have all the things that we have today. And I agree, I would not want to be doing all the laundry by hand, or taking the corn and trying to hull it, or having to butcher animals for our food, and raising all our crops, and digging a root cellar or place to put the ice. It's kind of amazing that we have what we have today. So, boys and girls, during this time that you're at home, think about all the wonderful things that God has given people a mind to invent. Look around your house and know that most of the convenient things that we have just came about in the last, I'd say about last 150 years, most of them. So it's a pretty exciting time, even though we're stuck at home because of this virus going around. We have a lot to be thankful for. All right, I have one more chapter to do, and I'll see you then. The last chapter is called The Deer in the Wood, and I'll read the chapter book, and then I'll read you the picture book, which is just a lovely picture book. All right, God bless, boys and girls. I'll see you at the next part of the story. Bye-bye.